Word, and then we'll. Thank you, Gary. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate everybody coming to this training session, just because this is for you guys as committee members, and we felt that it would be appropriate for everybody just to get just a little bit of training, just to advise you of, you know, what is your role, how are you supposed to do it. We're going to do a quick procedural training information from myself, who I'll introduce myself in just one second. And then we have two other guest speakers here who are coming, and they are going to provide you with some very important information. So just some housekeeping items. Gary, if I could ask you, just while I'm speaking, if you could just let anybody in who is attending, that would be great, just because I won't be focusing on that. Also, if you guys wanted, if you have any questions, please feel free to put up your hands. I don't believe that we have enough people to have a bandwidth issue, but if anybody starts getting any issues, please let me know and I can ask everybody to turn off their videos. I would ask that everybody turn off their microphones, just so that we don't have any background noise or distraction while everybody's trying to listen. So very briefly, thank you guys very much for taking the time to come. My name is Alicia Dijak. I'm the clerk here for the County of Brant, and my role here today is just to kind of lead everybody through the different sessions, introduce people, and then I'm also here just to provide Advisory Committee 101 training. I'm going to be talking to you briefly, maybe just about 10-15 minutes at the beginning, the roles of the committee, you know, why what you guys do is so important, and some tools that we can give you guys to make sure that you're successful in what you're doing. Following that, we do have Melinda Monroe here. We're lucky enough to have her be able to come and speak to you. So she is the Integrity Commissioner for the County of Brant. She is going to be providing you with some code of conduct training, just to make you aware what the policies are, and how that stuff kind of works and how that applies to your role as a committee member. And then to finish up, we have Roshni Lounsbury, who is the Health and Safety Supervisor for the County of Brant, and she will be providing you guys with some health and safety training that is needed as volunteers for the county. So Gary, I see there's a few people in the waiting room. If you could just let them in, that would be great. So first off, the role of the advisory committee. So what are these committees that you guys have been appointed to council on, and what is their role? So what they are and what they do is their role is to provide recommendations, advice, and information to council on specialized matters which relate to the purpose of the advisory committee. So if you are sitting, say, on the Heritage Committee, the expectation is that you and your committee will provide recommendations to council, and that they will receive those recommendations as kind of specialized. So you know more about it, and you're providing recommendations to them, in your opinion, on what actions you think the County of Brant should be taking. The reporting structure that we have here at the County of Brant it is visualized below. So you are at the bottom tier, so you are the advisory committees, and there are many different advisory committees, and they are all specialized. So you all are reporting to council on one special item. However, you don't report directly to council. All of your committees report up through standing committees. And so what the standing committees are, those are standing committees. They are all of council. They just sit as a committee rather than as council. So we currently have the Planning and Development Committee. So if you're here from the C of A or from the Agriculture Committee, that would be who you report to. The rest of them report up through the Admin and Operations Committee. We also have a Policy and Strategic Initiatives Committee, and we have a Paramedic Services Committee. So all of your recommendations get reported to council through the standing committees. The standing committees review your recommendations, and then they would pass them on as a recommendation of that committee. So what is committee business? How does your business get? First of all, how does business get before you? So how does information get in front of you? how do your decisions get made? And then how are those decisions communicated to council? So this is what we're going to talk about next, just kind of the meat and potatoes of what you do and how you do it. So as you will see, I believe most of you have met now. Business gets before the committee through agendas. So the agendas that are created by the clerk's department, and these will come from either Nancy or Briar, who you're both familiar, or who you're all familiar with, unless you happen to be here from Committee of Adjustment, and then that would be Alyssa. So they provide the outline of what will be discussed at the meeting. So because you're an official committee of council, you can't just arrive and talk about whatever it is that you know that you want to talk about. We have an agenda so that we have structured conversations, and so that those structured conversations can result in decisions which get forwarded on. So the agendas which are created, they go out the Fridays before the week before of whatever day your committee is on. Your agenda will go out on the Friday before. And they provide an outline of what will be discussed. What is the business that the committee will be reviewing? So if county staff have any information that they require the committee to review or to discuss, that will be provided to you by way of either a report, which will appear on the agenda, or they will appear, sometimes they do some verbal updates on items that don't require an official report, but if they want to provide you with information. So half of the information that you get, or maybe more than half, will be county staff driven. So they have an item that they need your committee to make a decision on, and so they get it there through either a report or through verbal update. Now, committee members, you guys will realize you can also drive content on the agendas as well. So probably the clerk who is clerking your meeting will be sending out an agenda call the week before, saying if you have any items that you would like to see on the agenda, please let me know by this day. And so this is what they're talking about. And so if there's anything that you would like the committee to discuss, this is the appropriate forum to get it there. You would reply back to the clerk and say, yes, I would like to talk about this. I would like to add this, this, and this to the agenda. And then you would provide any supplementary documentation. And the reason for this is that under the Municipal Act, we have open government, which means that there's open meetings and everybody can attend. In order for the public to know if they want to attend your meeting or if they're interested, they need to know what it is that you're going to be discussing. So if you're discussing something that maybe somebody wanted to attend and watch, they would know that by looking at the agendas, because that's when they know what the information would be. So as a last resort, and we usually do this as a last resort, when we do the approval of the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, you can raise your hand and say, I do have an item I'd like to add under other business. And so that is a perfectly viable way to do it. We don't recommend that, just again, because then people don't know, the general public won't know what it is that you're going to be discussing, but you can do that at that point. So you get your information on the agendas, you understand what you're going to be talking about, then you get to the committee and a decision has to be made. So decisions are made in meetings by way of a motion. So right here, I'm just going to really high level. This is what motions are. So at the very top, a member makes a motion. Now, if it's a report from a staff member that you're looking at, they will have a recommendation at the top of their report. So oftentimes what people will say is, I move the recommendation, right? So that's meaning whatever staff has recommended, this is, you know, what you're going to recommend. However, to make sure that meetings aren't dominated by one individual and not by the whole, what Robert's rule states is that another member has to second the motion. So so you have somebody raise their hand and say, I make the following motion, and then you have another member who seconds that. Once the member seconds that, then the motion, what we say, is on the floor, and then that's when debate takes place. So that's when you talk about it. Maybe you don't agree with what's being recommended. Maybe you're the one who recommended it and you do agree with it. This is when debate takes place and discussion takes place. And then when the discussion has run its conclusion, the chair would put the question to a vote. So once the vote is called, everybody will either raise their hand when the chair calls if they, in favor or opposed, and then the result of the vote is called, and that would be what moves on then, that recommendation to the next level. So now that you've made decisions, and these are all the decisions are made throughout your meetings, what happens is the clerk who is sitting there, who is staffing the meeting, takes minutes. So not only are they recording what is said, but also all of the decisions which are made. So all of those motions that we just talked about are put forward in a report, which goes to the standing committee. So they're summarized, and it's just the motions that are approved, and they're forwarded to the standing committee. So what would happen then is that the standing committee would look at that item. So say the report from the Agricultural Advisory Committee, it might have 3 recommendations. The standing committee would then vote on that. So the councillors as a committee would vote on that, and then that would get passed on to council as a recommendation. So any decisions, and this is really important that we remember, any decisions that are made by committees are just recommendations to council. And any decisions that are made by the standing committees, despite the fact that the standing committees are all councillors, those are only recommendations as well. Council has the final decision. So until it's decided by council, it is not approved, with the exception of 2 committees that members might be here. Committee of Adjustment. If you're here from Committee of Adjustment, that does not stand. Committee of Adjustment is the final say for all items which are in front of the Committee of Adjustment. Council does not have the ability to have final say on that. And the same thing would be with Police Board. Police Board is also autonomous, and those, although the minutes are reviewed by council, decisions are not approved. So what are the expectations from you guys? So, you're on the committees now, you've been appointed by council. So what is the county expecting of you? So firstly, familiarize yourself with the terms of reference of your committee. So understand what it is that your committee has been delegated authority to look at, right? What is it? What's your mandate? What are you to review, and what are you not to review? So Heritage has a very specific lane, so does Police Board, so does Committee of Adjustment. So you have to understand what it is that you're reviewing, and understand its relationship to council. So understand that you report up to a standing committee, but which standing committee do you report to? When do they meet? Right? Just so that you can kind of understand where you fit in the organization. Strive to attend all scheduled meetings and prepare for meetings by reading agendas. I'm sure that you're all aware that sometimes we run into issues, and there'll be talk about quorum. So what quorum is that requires a majority of members have to be there in order for decisions to get made. So although your committee can still meet, if you don't have quorum, decisions can't get made. And so all of any business would have to be deferred to the next meeting. So try to attend to the best of your ability. And if you can't, make sure that somebody knows, because maybe a meeting date would have to move, or business would proactively be deferred. Number 3, actively participate in the decision-making process while respecting the opinions of others. So if you've had meetings so far, you'll see that, or if you've been doing this for a long time, you'll know that not everybody agrees, and that's what democracy is all about. We have various opinions, and we want that. Healthy debate is encouraged, but you have to be respectful of the opinions of others. And Melinda will talk a bit more about the code of conduct as soon as I'm done, and she can maybe address some of the ways that you're encouraged to do that, and some of the ways that you're not. Or operate under the procedural bylaw. You were all forwarded a copy of this when you were first appointed by council. Take a read of it. I know it's long, and I know that it's difficult, and some of it might not, it might be in kind of gobbledygook to some of you. But if you have a question on how things are supposed to run, or if you have a question about anything under that, please just reach out to your clerk, either Briar or Nancy or Alyssa, and they will help you understand what it is that you're reading. Respect the recommendations that reflect the majority view. So if a decision gets passed in your committee that you don't agree with, that's fine. But you do have to respect that that is the majority view. That is, that's what the committee has decided. And the fourth one, I can't see it because you're all down the side of my screen, but I think it says respect the decisions and the finality of council. So respect that there might be some times where council does not agree with your recommendation. And that is their prerogative. They've been elected by the citizens of the county of Brant. And so we have to respect that in most cases, again, I cited the exceptions before, their decision is final. So some of you either maybe have been elected as a chair, maybe you're a vice chair and occasionally you have to step up to be a chair, or maybe you're not, but you're considering, you know what, maybe it's something I'd be interested in the future. And so just really quickly, the expectations of the chair. So what are we expecting from you? So first, operate the meetings because you are responsible as chair for the running of the meetings. That's not the clerk's job who's sitting there beside you. That's your job as chair. Operate the meetings under the county's procedural bylaw, identifying the order of proceedings and the speakers. So that means that you respect the agenda, you move business forward in the order identified on the agenda, and you respect the order of speakers. So if somebody puts up their hand first, they get to speak before somebody who puts up their hand second or maybe shouts out or something like that. Maintain decorum and ensure fairness. So if things get a bit rowdy, it is your job to bring everybody back under control. And encourage active participation. So if you notice as the chair, there's somebody who comes and they never really say anything, maybe ask them, before a meeting to move a motion, or maybe, ask them, I notice you haven't said anything yet. Do you have anything to add? We've heard from everybody else. Do you have anything to add? And maybe they don't, but just attempting to encourage participation. Ensure that there's quorum prior to calling the meeting to order. So we had that discussion before. If the majority, so that's 50% plus one, is not there, then the meeting has to be run differently. Decisions cannot be made, and respect that, right? The majority is not there. Here it's 50 plus one. If 50 plus one is not there, then decisions can't get made because the majority won't be known. Ensure that the will of the majority prevails after the minority has had a fair chance to present their point of view. So here we are very lucky that the minority who perhaps don't agree with the decision that's forthcoming, they still get to speak. So even if somebody is speaking against the motion, they have the opportunity to do so. Once everybody has had their turn to speak, then you would call the vote. And again, I am sorry, I can't see my fourth bullet, but I believe that it says that when you're speaking in public, so if you're the chair and if you're attending something, perhaps say as the chair of the CIP committee or the tourism committee, or I'm trying to Biggers Lane, right? I'm trying to give as many committees kind of a shout out as I can. When you are speaking, make sure that you are speaking as yourself. You're not speaking in opposition to what the committee has decided. And you're also not speaking on behalf of the committee on your own. So, well, as the chair of this committee, I say this, that's not appropriate. Decisions and opinions of committee get passed down through the decisions, right? Through the motions, through the recommendations to council. So Melinda is going to talk to you in a bit about the conflict of interest, when you would have a conflict of interest and when you would declare a conflict of interest. So I just wanted to take just a quick minute to explain to you, okay, when you understand that you have to declare a conflict, how do you actually do that, right? What does that look like? So when you're reviewing the agenda, if after you listen to what Melinda says and you realize, oh, I have a conflict of interest on that item, I shouldn't be voting. Ideally, what we would like you to do is reach out to the clerk before the meeting and let them know, right? Because then we can advise you proactively. If you're unaware that you have a conflict until you're in the meeting, or for whatever reason you didn't get to speak to the clerk, at every single meeting there is a declaration of pecuniary interest section. What this section is this is when anybody has a chance to lift up their hand and to advise when they have a conflict. So when that portion comes up, you would just raise your hand and you would state your conflict. So you would say, I have a conflict with regards to item 2B, right? You are not to participate in debate or vote. So you cannot participate in the discussion, nor can you vote. If the item that is up for discussion happens to be in camera, I know most of you don't go in camera, but a few of you do, then you actually have to leave the room for that part until the vote is declared. And then there's a declaration of interest form, which we have, which the clerk at your meeting would have. So you would just fill this out, and then we would keep that. We keep that as part of a register up in the clerk's department as a record. Oh. Okay, so that was the extent of my presentation. Now, does anybody have any questions before we move on to Melinda Monroe? We do have a couple minutes, but mine was going to be shorter. Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any. So Melinda, I know I saw you.
I'm here.
Perfect. Did you want to share your screen, or did you want me to share it for you?
Oh, I can share my screen then. That way I can control the slides if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do that. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to your meeting today. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you. It's the first time that we have actually done a presentation from the Integrity Commissioner since at least I've been the Integrity Commissioner, and that is since 2015. So just a bit of introduction, unless you want to do this, Alicia.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So I'm Melinda Monroe, as I mentioned. I trained as a lawyer. I do a lot of work in municipalities in Ontario, and I've been the Brant County Integrity Commissioner now since 2015. Fortunately, we've only had a couple of really big investigations and then a couple of really small ones. So mostly everything is pretty cool down there in the county of Brant. What I'm going to do is go fairly quickly through a lot of kind of complex stuff. I hope that you have access to, or you have, you can go later to look at your code of conduct, because I'm going to refer to the sections. But what I'm going to try and do is walk through a little bit of the design of it, because it's meant to kind of help you. It's meant to be understandable, even though a lot of the language is very technical. And then I'm going to walk through a little bit about what happens if there's an actual complaint made. And I'm going to do a tiny little bit extra on harassment, because that is what we seem to be seeing across the province in terms of the increasing number of complaints are coming in the harassment sphere, as opposed to what used to be the all conflict of interest. So save your questions if you want, and I'm happy to answer them at the end, or of course you can contact me anytime. So let's start with the beginning. So the code of conduct starts with this opening paragraph, and I think that's always wise. You could even like print this out and put it over your desk or something. The code of conduct exists. It's required by the Municipal Act, but it exists to help ensure that members of council, local boards, and advisory committees share a common basis of acceptable conduct. So we're talking about agreeing how we're going to behave together. And these standards are intended to enhance the public's confidence that the County of Brant's elected and appointed officials operate from the basis of integrity, justice, and courtesy. And so that's kind of important, those statements. Like, think about that, you know, everything you do is tied to integrity, justice, and courtesy. I'm just moving my little microphone so that you can hopefully hear me better. All right. The application of this to advisory committees is that the Municipal Act has to have a code of conduct that applies to local boards. It doesn't actually require, the Act doesn't require that it apply to advisory committees, but the code of conduct for Brant does. So it specifically says this code of conduct is to establish standards of conduct for council, local boards, and advisory committees. So this code of conduct applies to you, even if the Municipal Act technically only applies to local boards and members of council. Just a quick kind of local boards are a specific type of thing under the Municipal Act, and what the difference between a local board and most of what you do, which is as advisory committees, local boards usually have some independent authority. So they can actually, somewhat related to what Alicia was just saying, they can actually make binding decisions that bind the county, whereas advisory committees typically just give advice to council. And so that's why there's some different rules for local boards. But for most of you, it's just about the advisory committee rules. All right. So the Code of Conduct has a number of about 30 sections. Lots of them are just procedural details about how to actually investigate complaints that apply to me. But for you, Section 2 is applicable laws. So if you're reading your Code of Conduct, you will see in Section 2 that not only does the Code of Conduct apply, but the Municipal Act applies, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act applies, Freedom of Information Act applies, the Elections Act applies, Health and Safety, which you'll hear about later, Human Rights Code, and the Criminal Code of Canada. So you are required to comply with other laws, not just this Code of Conduct. And so part of your Code of Conduct is to be a lawful person. Section 3 is the application section to whom it applies. And Section 4 is a set of definitions. So when in doubt about what a word means in the code, you go to Section 4, and Section 4 will spell it out. And if it's not spelled out in Section 4, then we're really thinking about what's the dictionary definition of that word. So Section 5 is really the heart of it. And Section 5 is the part you really need to be connected to and understand. And I'm going to do, the next set of slides are going to be taking you through the heart of Section 5 and how it applies. And it connects to other sections in the code. And I'll make reference to that too, where it comes up. So the first thing is, so Section 5, what you want to be if you're complying with your Code of Conduct is honest, tell the truth, don't withhold things that you know that are important. Conscientious and diligent, do your homework, as Alicia said. Be prepared for meetings, read the reports in advance, do the research, talk to the constituents if you think you need to hear from the public before you go to that meeting. Focus on the issues, not the personalities. There's lots of organizations where they've been members of committees for years and the people just don't get along with each other. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the issue, not the fact you don't like the person sitting next to you or the way they talk or whatever it is you don't like about them. Integrity, accountability, transparency without conflicts of interest. So this is bring your best self to the meeting, be prepared to be accountable, be transparent, let the public in, and don't do things that are clearly in your interest instead of in the interest of the public as a whole. We'll talk about conflicts of interest because they're kind of special. Temperate. So temperate is about, being polite and restrained and not shouting or swearing or kind of, freaking out over things. It's really thinking through how do I be the most accessible and sensible person I can be. As I mentioned, be lawful, which we already talked about, and then be ethical, even beyond conflicts of interest. Be ethical, think about what the public interest is before your own interest. All right, so just stepping through some of these things specifically. Section 5, honesty. So you are not, have no intention to mislead, and you don't make false statements. So you don't lie, you don't omit, you don't kind of elide, you tell the truth, you're clear. And Section 6, accurately represent decisions. So where this is important, and it's come up sometimes in complaints, is that when the committee has made its decision, the Heritage Committee is going to recommend that a certain building get on the Heritage Registry, and that's going up the chain through the standing committees to council. If you didn't agree with that, it's one thing to say, well, my colleagues made this decision. I wasn't that happy about it, but I was there and the decision was made and I now support it because my job is to support the majority decisions. It doesn't mean you can't say, I wish it hadn't gone that way and I'm not that happy about it. But what you can't do is lie about it. What you can't do is say they only made that decision because they're all friends with Fred, or they only made that decision because they want to get reelected in that ward. That's inaccurately representing the decision. You have to tell the truth about what happened, and you are required to be supportive of the majority's decision. That doesn't mean if it comes before you again, you can't vote differently. It doesn't mean that you couldn't actually support people who are appearing in front of a standing committee who want to take a position against the committee's decision. It does mean you have to tell the truth about what happened, and you don't sort of get to go around and say, well, I'm the only person that was right on this thing. Support your colleagues. All right. The next thing, be conscientious and diligent. And Alicia talked a lot about this. Serve your constituents conscientiously, participate, engage in the meetings. If you're in a meeting, if you spend the entire 4 years never saying a word in any meetings, I'm going to ask you whether you're participating diligently and you're really engaging with the material. Act to the best of your ability. Do your best. You don't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes. You can even make mistakes about whether you're in a conflict of interest if you actually are trying your best and you're open and transparent, right? So act to the best of your ability. But when you know that you don't know something, go and ask for help. So don't think that, well, just because I'm on this committee, I know everything. We all know that that's not the case for any of us. Exercise your powers for the purpose they were intended. So you're not using your role on this committee to unduly influence other things. So be conscientious, be diligent, do your best, but you don't have to be perfect. Respectful. So you'll see I've referenced a couple of other sections here. So section 5, section 17 and 18 all talk about respect. So focus on issues, not personalities. Avoid aggressive, offensive, or abusive conduct. Imagine having to write that out, that people just commonsensically, we know we're not supposed to be aggressive, offensive, or abusive, but we've written it out specifically. Be temperate. Treat the public and employees with dignity and respect. That's going to come up in your talk about health and safety, I'm sure, but you have a duty to treat the public and the employees with respect. Respect the role of counsel and the rules of procedure. That's in your code of conduct. There's not just a rule from your bylaw, your procedural bylaw, but from your conduct. Respect these roles. And then section 18 specifically talks about respecting employees as professionals and respecting their independence. Now, this is important. We had a big investigation back in 2016 with respect to a previous mayor who kind of had a style of being a bit flippant about employees in his speech. And he made a conduct that was quite derogatory of an individual who was a former employee who was an engineer. So your engineers, your lawyers, your planners all have to comply with a code of conduct for their profession, as well as work for you. And sometimes they're going to actually have to tell you that you're not allowed to do something that you think is really important. And rather than then just call them out, tell them you think they're incompetent, criticize their professionalism, your code of conduct says you're not allowed to do that. It doesn't mean you can't say, I'd like another report on this because I really want some more research. I need to understand better. But you don't just get to say that employee is not competent, or I don't like that employee, or that employee doesn't do very good work. Section 18 says you must respect them as professionals and you must respect their independence. All right. Transparency and confidentiality. So this is another part of section 5, but it connects to section 9. So first of all, be open, be transparent. Let the public come to your meetings and participate. Have your minutes be open. All of that stuff that Alicia talked about. But also, section 9 links back to the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So that it's got 2 sections. Freedom of information. The public have the right to ask for stuff, particularly if it applies to them, and protection of privacy. So your job is to make sure that confidential information remains confidential. Many of you probably won't have access to confidential stuff in your work, but it's entirely possible from time to time that you might. If it's confidential, then it's confidential. That means a couple of things. Don't leave the papers lying around. Don't be Maxime Bernier and leave them in the washroom somewhere. Don't leave papers lying around. But also, if you're in a Zoom meeting and you're in a confidential portion of that Zoom meeting, then you must be alone, right? Can't have your grandkids in there. Can't have your family walking by the room. The door's shut, you're alone, because no one is supposed to know that information except you. So even at home on a Zoom, you need to make sure that you're protecting the confidentiality of the information that you're dealing with. Lawful, we've mentioned that. Uphold the law personally and professionally. Uphold the law of other jurisdictions, provincial, federal, criminal code, other laws. So if you wind up getting arrested for drunk driving, it's possible someone can bring a code of conduct complaint against you for not behaving well. Now, it's unlikely to result in much of a reprimand, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about here. All right. That was section 5, and that's really the heart of conduct. Here are some other sections you need to be aware of. Section 10. So stay in your lane. You have a lane, which is your committee's responsibility. So stay in your lane. Don't use county property for private purposes. You've probably been given county emails. You might from time to time be given access to county property. Don't use it for private. Your county email is not for running your business or sending emails to your family. Your county email is for county work. Don't use county staff or property for elections. If you, for many advisory committee members, often move on to become elected officials in the future, you can't use that email or county staff or county property like the photocopier for your elections or anyone else's elections. Respect the staff council relationship and this counselor to counselor relationship. So you are colleagues with one another. So counselor to counselor, committee member to committee member. You are here as in a professional capacity as an appointed official, and you need to respect that that's what the other people on your committee are there to do as well. All right, so that's the code of conduct in general. And I haven't gone to complaints. I'll get to that in a minute, how complaints are handled. I want to talk about the Conflict of Interest Act, because this is one where a lot of head scratching goes on by advisory committee members and board members and council members. So the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act is a separate law from the Municipal Act. And it applies to members of county council and members of local boards, but not to advisory committees. So local boards, in your case, include things like the county, some of those county boards that you may have been appointed to sit on, like police services. Sometimes shared social services boards are designated as local boards. Your committee of adjustment is a local board for purposes of the Conflict of Interest Act. So if you're here as a member of the committee of adjustment, the MCIA applies to you. If you're here as a member of the Heritage Committee, MCIA doesn't apply to you. That doesn't mean you don't have code of conduct, conflict of interest responsibility. So the Conflict of Interest Act says you may not have a financial conflict, and a financial conflict is direct, you personally, or indirect, which is someone to whom you are associated. So if you are on the board of a corporation, if that corporation has an interest in something, then you have the same conflict that they do. If you're chair of the Kinsmen and the Kinsmen have a financial interest in something, then you have that financial, it's ascribed to you. Also your spouse and your kids. So any of those groups have a financial interest in something, then you have the same financial interest. But it only applies to financial interests. It doesn't apply to if you're good friends with someone, or if you might be good for your reputation. That doesn't apply. It is financial interest only under the Conflict of Interest Act. But the code of conduct, because it applies to all members, including advisory committees, then it brings the principles of the Conflict of Interest Act into play for you. So if you are found to be in a conflict under the MCIA because you're a council member or you're a member of a local board, there's an investigation and then it goes to court, and the court decides what happens. If there's a conflict of interest investigation that is only under the code of conduct because it's an advisory committee member, then the code of conduct applies. I investigate and I decide what to recommend in terms of a reprimand. That's the really big difference. And we've seen that very recently. You may have heard in the news that the mayor of Elliott Lake was just removed as the mayor by a court in relation to a conflict of interest. So that's not going to happen to an advisory committee member, but it could happen to a councillor or a member of a local board. So first of all, observe the rules in the Conflict of Interest Act and the Code of Conduct. So as Alicia said, if you think you might be in a conflict, ask for help. You can ask me, you can ask Alicia. And if we say, you probably are, or it's close enough, step away, then step away. So you're not allowed to influence the meeting. You're not allowed to lobby, and you should actually remove yourself from the meeting, though it's only mandatory if the meeting is an in-camera meeting. And you fill out the declaration form and you submit it. If we think you don't have a conflict of interest, but you still feel like you need to, explain what you're doing, we can talk about other processes by which you say to the public, I know you think I have a conflict, but I don't really have a conflict. So Section 12, the conflict of interest rules apply. Section 8 is a kind of a little subset of conflicts, in the sense that gifts are a particularly tricky item. And so the code simply says, just use your common sense. Don't accept gifts, and don't let your family accept gifts. And by gifts, we mean like things of more than a minor value. So a $50, little trophy from that says, thank you for being our committee. No problem. Food at an event. No problem. But if it's, a significant gift, if you're starting to, give you, Rolex watches, stay well back from that, right? No gifts, and don't let your family accept gifts. So what is a conflict of interest? So this is what the law says what a conflict of interest is, and it's pecuniary or financial only. So where a member on either on his or her own behalf or while acting for, by, or with, or through another has a pecuniary interest, direct or indirect, so you personally or an organization that you're associated with, in any matter, and is present at a meeting of council or a local board at which the matter is subject of consideration, so you're debating the thing about which you have a conflict, you, first of all, shall, prior to any consideration, disclose the interest. 2, or B, not take part in the discussion or vote on any question in respect of the matter. So step away from the whole thing. And the most important one here, 3, not attempt in any way before, during, or after the meeting influence the voting on any such question. This is part of what happened to the mayor of Elliott Lake, is that he may have behaved appropriately in the meetings, but outside the meetings, he was trying to pressure his colleagues into voting in a particular way that would have resulted in building an arena near where he owned a private business. What about the non-financial conflicts? And I hear this a lot where someone will say, well, but Councillor so-and-so, Councillor Dijak, she is best friends with Bob Hamilton, and Bob Hamilton's going to make money if this decision goes through. And so she's in a conflict. Okay. So if she's not making money off Bob Hamilton's work, she's not in a conflict, not a financial conflict that has to be disclosed in the same way under the law. So what we call those is non-disqualifying conflicts. And there's no language about this in the current code of conduct, but it's worth thinking about. It's starting to emerge in discussions about municipal ethics. So a non-financial conflict of interest can look really bad. It can undermine the public's trust in what the council is doing or the advisory committee or the local board is doing. But it doesn't require, the law does not require you to step back. So I find it useful to recommend to someone, have a prepared statement about why it's not financial and why you don't believe it will interfere with your ability to make a fair decision. And I just gave some advice to a councillor recently on the very topic. If you don't believe you can be impartial, so it's not financial, but you're so invested in whatever it is that's going to happen because of your friendship or your family relationship, whatever it is, and you don't think you can make a fair decision, you always have the option to simply step away or to abstain from the decision. And you can even say why. Just, I can't make a fair decision because of this situation, so I'm just going to abstain from this vote and let my colleagues. You have the option of doing that. And that can avoid the, we'll see social media or things where the editorials complaining that you should have stepped away, even when legally you weren't required. But, as we sometimes say in the municipal world, it looks like hell to the public. It may not be illegal, but it looks like hell to the public. So think through whether you want to have a way of having a prepared statement to explain why it shouldn't look like hell, or why you're going to actually, going back to our section 5, act in a temperate, responsible, intelligent manner. All right, with that, investigating conflicts of interest. I'm going to start with these investigations, then we'll go to the general ones. If it is a member of council or a local board, the complaint comes to me. I do an investigation. I have a very short window in which I have to decide if we're going to court or not going to court. And then ultimately it's a court that decides whether there's a conflict and what to do. And those courts can issue reprimands, they can issue penalties, and they can actually remove elected officials from their seats, which, as say, they recently did in the case of Elliott Lake. Members of advisory committees, that complaint will come to me. And then I investigate it like I investigate any other code of conduct matter under section 26 of the code of conduct. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about, then I'm going to jump to that thing about investigations, is discreditable conduct or harassment. So section 19 brings in all of these pieces of legislation and policy, the Human Rights Code, which has the grounds of discrimination, the Health and Safety Act, which talks about violence and harassment in the workplace, the Prevention of Violence in the Workplace policy for the County of Brant, and the Brant workplace harassment policies. So all of those things apply to you. And so you must behave in ways that avoid harassment, violence, discrimination, racism, sexism, etc. And what we have seen in Brant is that the investigations that come forward are typically related to issues of harassment, intemperate language in a meeting, racist behavior on Facebook, all of those types of behaviors can come in under the code of conduct. So if you are acting in your official capacity, and you pretty much going to be always are in some ways now that you're on committees, on your Facebook page, your Twitter feed, your Instagram, you no longer get to just say whatever you want without recourse. If someone feels like you've harassed them or personally attacked them, they can bring a complaint. That doesn't mean they're going to succeed, but they can. Same with if you harass staff, and we've seen that in other municipalities and also in Brant, where a politician is just unkind or harassing to staff people in the building, in meetings, that can bring a discreditable conduct or harassment complaint. All right. What is harassment? Members shall not harass other members, employees, or individuals providing services on a contract for service, students on placements, or the public, where harassment means engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct that is known or are reasonably known to be unwelcome. So the defense was, it was just a joke, isn't going to fly. Vexatious means it was unnecessary. So you can provide a performance review of someone that makes them feel uncomfortable, but it's not vexatious because it's an appropriate act, it's necessary. But if you're just cracking jokes because you think you're really funny and somebody's harassed by that, saying, well, I thought it was funny, is not, it's not a defense. So a vexatious comment or conduct known or ought known to be unwelcome. And then for greater clarity, section 19.6 talks about, specifically, do not speak in a manner that's discriminatory to any individual based on their race, ancestry, place of origin, creed, gender, sexual orientation, age, color, marital status, or disability. Don't make indecent, abusive, insulting, or inappropriate comments or gestures about an individual. Do not display materials or transmit communications that are inappropriate, offensive, insulting, or derogatory. So think about the memes that might be going by. Don't make threats or engage in abusive activity or conduct toward others. Don't vandalize personal property of others. Imagine having to write that down. You know, it just happened in Calgary. A councillor keyed the car of the mayor in the private parking. He now has to park in another parking lot. Do not commit assault of any kind, including unwanted physical contact, touching, patting, or pinching. Refuse to converse or interact with anyone based on a ground listed in the Human Rights Code. So all of that applies. Now, all right, investigations. First thing, just avoid complaints. So behave in ways that are really upfront, honest, transparent, with integrity, and no one's going to make complaints against you. If you get a complaint, and the first way you might get it is simply someone says, please stop doing that. So speak, or you think someone else is doing something and you want them to stop. Speak to them, speak to the member of the public with respect, see if you can resolve it. Because quite often just saying, knock it off will work, because no one wants to hurt other people. If a complaint is filed, so it must be within 6 weeks of the event. So if it happened 2 years ago, it's too late, unless for some reason nobody was able to find out that it had happened. And this is the first we know of it. But if there's an incident at a meeting or an event in the next week, you have 6 weeks from then to bring the complaint, or the person who wants to bring the complaint. I look at it. So I look at it and I go, there's nothing here. And I write to the complainant and say, there's nothing here. Maybe there's another way we can resolve this, but there's no complaint. If I think there is something there, my first step is going to be to reach out and see, can we mediate? Can we resolve this through a mediation and make the complaint go away? Like, where the person will withdraw the complaint because they feel that the matter's been resolved. I will do that in every case. Can it be solved by mediated settlement? Yes, it can. So I can host a meeting, or we can bring in a different third party. We try and come up to a resolution. If we do, we write out an agreement. The complaint is typically withdrawn and the matter is ended at that point in private. So that can happen. If that doesn't work, then we start an investigation. So typically the investigation has to be 90 days. I have 90 days or 3 months to interview everyone, look at all the documents I need to look at the law, look at meetings, watch the YouTube videos. At the end of that 90-day period, I issue a report, and I can extend that time if for whatever reason we can't get it done in that time. The report then goes to council. So even in the case of an advisory committee code of conduct issue, it wouldn't come to the committee. It will go to council, and council will debate it. So they can adopt or reject my recommendation, but it's not a new trial. So you don't come to council and we have a new trial and everybody gets cross-examined again. All of that happens in the complaint process. Once the report goes to council, they just decide, are we accepting the recommendation or are we not? Once they've made their decision, the report must be made public. It's required in the Municipal Act. So that's investigations in general. Specifically in a harassment investigation, harassment is primarily determined by the person being harassed. So if someone says you've harassed them, the first step is to believe that person, and then to sort of investigate and see if they're just making it up. But we start from the position of, if a person feels harassed, then their version of events is more likely to be believed. If a reasonable person would consider it to be harassment, then it's harassment. So you think, well, I think it was funny, and everyone I'm associated with thinks it was funny, but a reasonable person would say, that was not funny, it was harassment. Then that's what's going to rule the day. So your intention is largely irrelevant, though, it'll be taken into account. And the two forces work, there's a lot on this slide, but I just want you to kind of have this sense of, and because you're going to talk about health and safety in just a minute. On one side, we're looking at penalties to punish people for harassing behavior. That's kind of where my role is. I'm not there to help solve the problem, make it better, improve the systems. I'm there to say, did it happen? Did it not happen? What's the penalty? The same is true under human rights law. The same is true if the Ministry of Labor shows up. The same is true if someone sues you for defamation. We're looking for sanctions, damages, and deterrence. But internally, if you harass a staff person, God forbid, please don't do that. But if you harass your staff person, what the health and safety people at Brant are trying to do is protect people. So they're not interested in punishing you. They're interested in, can they protect their staff person? Can they make sure that it's safe for that staff person to continue to come to work? Can they resolve the matter and improve the workplace culture? And this is where you'll see the kind of two things rubbing together. If you are found to be harassing staff people, I may issue a penalty or recommend a penalty, but Alicia is going to be saying, you can't come in the building anymore. And you can't do your job very well if you're not allowed to come in the building anymore. So that's really important to keep in mind. I want to very quickly get to the last thing here, and I think we'll finish here, as I know we're running out of time. Political speech. So one of the things that's really emerging in the last few years is criticism of municipal staff, like, the ECAO isn't doing a good job, or extreme political ideologies like coming to council and using some of the language that we hear lately around the protests in Ottawa. Are those things protected political speech? Can you make them without there being a code of conduct complaint or a complaint under the procedural bylaw as a point of order? What's the balance between political speech and harassment, and how does the CAO or municipal government balance its duty as employer with protecting your right to have a political position? Because you're entitled to have ideology. I mean, that's part of why you get involved in these things. So this is just a quote from Gutowski and Clayton, which is a Court of Appeal case. So you are different from federal MPs and municipal MP or provincial MPPs. They have special rights because they are created under different laws. You folks are subordinate to the provincial legislature. And so the court has said, yes, you are conduits for the voices of your constituents. Yes, you can convey grievances to municipal government and inform them about the state of the government, but your freedom of speech is not absolute. It is limited by the rights, other people's rights to the protection of their reputation. And so you must act, so what it says, accordingly, well, elected as municipal officials or appointed, may be quite free to discuss matters of the public interest. They must act as would a reasonable person, and the reasonableness of their conduct will be demonstrated by their good faith and prior checking that they did to satisfy themselves as to the truth of their allegations. So if you're going to make statements that are controversial, you need to be clear that you've done your research, you're acting in good faith, and that you've done your checking to determine that the truth of your allegations. So, this is where in one of our complaints that I investigated a few years ago, the councillor tried to make the case that his racist positions on certain members of the community were protected freedom of speech, and they are not. That right does not exist in your role as a municipal councillor or an advisory committee member. If you want to take extreme positions, then you need to step away from your official role and do it in your private life. And you will find in the next 4 years, your private life and your official role are pretty close together. So if you really want to take extreme positions, an advisory committee job is not for you. All right, I think I'll stop there. I'm going the wrong way here. On the back of this slide deck, which I think Alicia will have shared with you, is my phone number and my email address. You are entitled to call me anytime, email me anytime, ask me if you really don't know what to do in a situation. You feel free to reach out. And if you do reach out, you're really unsure, we can engage in a written correspondence, which if ultimately a complaint occurs and I've told you something's okay to do, you do it and you get a complaint, that written correspondence will protect you. So keep in mind, contacting me well in advance and telling me everything. Treat me like your priest. I have to know everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Otherwise, I can't help you. But please feel free to do that. You are entitled to, and it's the best way to make all this work. All right, I'm going to stop there and let that so that you can get on to your last thing without running out of too much time. Any questions before I see a hand up? Bill. I think you're on mute.
It deals with the conflict of interest. So say if I was to declare a conflict of interest on an issue and step away from the table, does that reduce the quorum for that meeting then?
Oh, it's kind of an interesting question. In the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for a council would say no, because what you do is you reduce the requirements for quorum by that person that has stepped away, so you never do lose quorum. For an advisory committee, I mean, I think I would take the same position. Alicia may have a view on this, that you choosing to sort of step away or abstain just reduces the total required for quorum.
Yeah, so Melinda, I'd agree with you. We would treat the advisory committees the same way. And actually, Bill, it's interesting. You know, the government actually foresaw this, and so the quorum you can go down to 2 if you have to. If enough people declare a conflict and step away, we could go right down to 2 people left for that specific, only for declaration of a conflict only.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, does anybody else have any questions for Melinda? All right, I don't see any other hands. Melinda, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to the committee members. We will be providing a copy of her presentation to all of you, along with, we'll be sending it along to all of the committee members who couldn't make it today. So everybody will have your contact information. So thank you very much. And you guys will have her contact. So if you come across any other questions or if anything comes up, feel free to reach out. I did see Roshni join the meeting. So once again, Roshni is the Health and Safety Supervisor for the County of Brant here, and she is going to be delivering a presentation on health and safety training that you would need. So Roshni.
Hi, thanks, Alicia. Yep, my name is Roshni Lounsbury. I'm with the County of Brant, and I am a health and safety supervisor here. I've been with the county for just about 3 years, and I've been in health and safety for almost 20 years. So in case you guys ever have questions, I'm a good resource to have when it comes to health and safety. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Can you see it yet, Alicia, or not yet? Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Oh, there we go.
1 second. I think I've done a training on Zoom before. Just trying to find you guys again on my screen. Sorry about that. Just give me a few seconds to figure out how I can get you guys back on my screen too.
If you do speaker view, then you'll see your screen and you'll see you'll see a few tiles down the side, and that will be anybody who's got their camera on and speaking. So if somebody turns on their microphone, you'll see them.
See everybody, but for some reason the screen where you guys are all on is shrunk.
You will see just your presentation because I have it on side-by-side speaker view. And then when you're finished, I will put it back to gallery so you'll see everybody for questions.
Okay, I think for some reason it's okay. I'll just move forward. I can't see everybody properly on my screen. It's a little bit distracting on my end, but that's okay. So yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know too much about your background and what kind of health and safety training you've had in the past. So I apologize if some of this is repetitive, but the intent of this very brief overview of health and safety is just to give you an idea of some of the health and safety initiatives or activities that we participate in at the county. And anyways, I'll go through all the topics. It is a lot of information. Normally this course would probably take at least 2 hours. And then some of the topics we do like 4-hour training within the county, etc. So today I'm just giving you a very brief overview of some of the key topics. I think Alicia will be also sending out for you guys a handout that we prepared that just goes into more details in case you guys needed more information on any of these topics. And then our team is always available in case you guys have any questions offline, or even during the session, you can ask me if you have any questions or concerns that you've seen when it comes to health and safety. So these are some of the topics that we'll be covering today. I'll be talking a little bit about the internal response-based system, roles and responsibilities for health and safety, talking a little bit about the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the rights of a worker, a little bit about workplace hazards and reporting requirements, talk a little bit about WMIS, and talk about violence and harassment in the workplace. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. I tend to get excited when it comes to safety, so I'll try and keep it moving, and hopefully you guys can hear me and understand me well. So why is health and safety orientation important? I think a lot of companies provide health and safety orientation to their employees, but in 2013, the Ministry of Labor actually made it law. They created a separate regulation where employers had to give all anybody who's considered a worker, and we have volunteers also fall under the definition of worker, and there's minimum requirements. So that's kind of how this presentation is laid out, is to make sure that we're providing that minimum information. So all workers and supervisors in organizations have to participate in orientation training, and worker pretty much is everybody, you know, from the bottom all the way to the top. Obviously, it's important for all stakeholders in the organization to be aware of what their health and safety responsibilities are. It's important for workers to know their rights. I think a lot of us, you know, have been working for a number of years, understand what our rights are. And one of the things I always think about is, you know, kids in our life, you know, kids or nieces, nephews, etc. Like I always like to, you know, kind of ask them questions about employers that they work for and make sure that they understand their rights. So we'll talk about a little bit about rights and especially then reporting requirements too. We're not going to touch base on every reporting requirement, but there are legal reporting requirements and internal reporting requirements that are important. And then obviously doing orientation, etc. All contributes to having a positive safety culture. It shows, you know, that the employer cares, supervisors care, etc. By, you know, talking about safety and making safety part of, you know, the everyday life and the workplace. Hopefully everybody's familiar. In Ontario, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is a green book. It's important. Like, I think that's something very basic. Every province in Ontario has a different legislation that they follow. They have different their books are different colors in every province, and different provinces have different setup of or layout of their Occupational Health and Safety Act. The way the act is written, it's basically about the internal response-based system. So health and safety is everybody's responsibility, and not just, you know, like health and safety, like somebody like me, my responsibility. I've worked in organizations where you know, I was the first person on payroll for health and safety, and people think, good, you know, now everything is Roshni's responsibility, and that's not how health and safety works. You know, health and safety is responsibility of the employer, supervisor, and workers. And we'll be talking about some of those responsibilities today. And basically the act, to me, is like, it's set up to be very general, almost vague, and the high level duties of health and safety. And then under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there's many regulations, and those go into the more specific requirements. You know, there's industrial regulations, healthcare regulations, construction regulations, mining, etc. So talking a little bit about roles and responsibilities, and remember, like, I'm trying to give a very high level, and you'll see it throughout the presentation where I put some sections in green. That's just to show you that you know, these are actually pulled from the health and safety legislation, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So the employers have the greatest responsibilities for ensuring health and safety in the workplace. They're responsible for preparing a policy. So at the county, we have 3 health and safety policies. We have the corporate occupational health and safety policy, we have the workplace violence and harassment policy, and we have the mental health and well-being policy as well. And those are reviewed annually by the CAO and mayor and signed and posted on our safety boards. And that also complies with the legislation, and it shows the commitment to the company has for safety and what their intent is for health and safety at the workplace. Another big responsibility for the employer is to make sure that they're providing information about hazards in the workplace, making sure that they're providing protective equipment, training, and making sure that they have competent supervision too. And, you know, sometimes organizations may not be aware of this, but I put on the bottom there what how they define a competent person. So that's somebody who's familiar with the act and regulations. So no, those people don't have to have everything memorized when it comes to legislation, but they need to be familiar that, you know, there are some key responsibilities. And that's why, you know, we make sure that supervisors and workers go through different types of training to make sure that they're competent and familiar with applicable legislation. They have to be qualified and have knowledge, training, and experience to organize the work. So obviously, you know, a supervisor, when being appointed, they need to be familiar with the work that the workers are doing and have some experience and knowledge. The next one goes into knowledge of potential actual dangers in the workplace. And you can see the keyword there for me is and after the second bullet. So all 3 have to be applicable in order, you know, when the employer is appointing competent supervision. So they need to also ensure that there's equipment and material provided, that they're cooperating with the Joint Health and Safety Committee. We'll talk about the Joint Health and Safety Committee in a second, and then make sure they're complying with all regulations. And then this one's a kicker. I used to work for a health and safety lawyer for a number of years in Toronto. And I always found that when the Ministry of Labor didn't have a specific like section of the legislation to reference, they would always fall on this one. And it's called the general duty clause. So the employer has to take every precaution reasonable in the circumstance for the protection of worker. And I've seen employers where they get charged under that section. And basically that keyword there is reasonable. So to me, an employer is always going to be able to demonstrate reasonable if they look at the tasks that the employee was responsible for and making sure that they've identified the hazards for that task and making sure that they have appropriate control measures or safety measures for that task. And then that's going to show basically that general duty, or that they've taken that reasonable circumstance to protect the worker. The next one is for the owners. So owners have a responsibility to make sure that, because sometimes, yeah, in a workplace, they can be an owner and no employer, where, you know, maybe we're leasing a building, etc. So the workplace facilities have to be provided and maintained as prescribed in the regulations. The workplace complies with the regulations, make sure that it's constructed, developed, reconstructed, altered, and or added to accept in the compliance with the act and regulations. And then where necessary, provide the director of the Ministry of Labor with drawings, plans, etc. The next section is directors and officers of the company. They have the responsibility to make sure that, again, that the corporation takes all reasonable care, complying with the acts and regulations, complying with orders. So orders are basically, if a Ministry of Labor inspector was to come into the workplace and if they found, you know, that there was some non-compliance, they would issue an order, and they would, the company or the supervisor would have a certain amount of time to comply with the order. So directors need to make sure that those orders are being complied with. And I've worked in organizations where I've worked in really, really large organizations, and then sometimes management of a certain area department, they may forget to escalate those orders all the way to the directors and the board of the company. And it's important to escalate those. They need to be, because they have so much responsibility to making sure that the act is being complied with, it's important for them to be familiar and aware of any orders that are being issued. So here at the county, for example, we provide dashboard reports. Health and safety team provides dashboard reports for the senior leadership team and or the senior management team, and we present that on a quarterly basis. So they're aware of, all the incidents that are happening in the workplace, if any, and any orders being issued by the Ministry of Labor, if any. The next one is the supervisors. Supervisors, aside from the employer, probably has one of the most responsibilities in the workplace. Supervisor typically is defined as anybody who hires or fires, has the authority to hire and fire a worker, and somebody who has the authority to organize the work that employees are being given. So supervisors have to make sure, again, that the workplace is safe, make sure that their employees are provided with training and information, make sure, again, that the make sure the supervisors are ensuring that there's compliance in the workplace. And again, for them, just like the employer, they have that general duty clause also to take every precaution reasonable. So it's a lot of responsibility on the supervisors. And yeah, again, that's why we provide lots of training for supervisors and making sure we do a 4-hour special due diligence training, teaching our supervisors how to make sure that they're going to be compliant with legislation, et cetera. And then our workers, I talked about the workers, it's important for them to know their rights. Workers have 3 basic rights: right to know about the hazards in the workplace, right to participate in health and safety, and right to refuse work. And the right to refuse work, it has to be right to refuse unsafe work, because I've seen organizations where, an employee tries to refuse work, but it's because, they don't like the task that was assigned to them, et cetera. That's not going to be worthy of a work refusal. It has to be refusing unsafe work. And in my 20 years, I haven't seen a lot of work refusal because, again, typically supervisors, a joint health and safety committee, health and safety team, takes so much pride in making sure that hazards are identified, et cetera. So it's very rare I've seen where a worker has to come down to the point to refuse unsafe work. Typically, if worker is refusing unsafe work, maybe they're not aware of the safe measures that are in place. But it's really good that this is a right, though, anyways, because, again, not all employers are at the same caliber. I've heard of employers where, they tend to cut corners and try to, put productivity first. And those are the organizations where, employees need to really rely on these rights and be able to execute those rights if needed. So workers have to work safely and in compliance with the Act and regulations. They have a legal responsibility under Section 28 to report any unsafe conditions and injuries. So if they see anything unsafe, they have a legal responsibility. I would never accept a worker coming to me and saying, "Oh yeah, it's been like that for months and I knew about it and I worked that way anyways in those unsafe conditions." That's not acceptable. Workers should be reporting unsafe conditions to their supervisors. They have a legal right also to wear any safety equipment that is being provided. And again, I've worked in organizations where, employees will say something like, "Oh, but they're my eyes and I get to choose whether I want to wear, safety glasses or not." In our homes, we can choose to decide what risks we take and, how safe and unsafe we work, whether we stand on on a chair or, on the counter, et cetera. We can, and how we use chemicals, et cetera. But in the workplace, again, the employer and supervisor has, and the workers have such a responsibility to make sure that they're following safe work procedures. And the last one says, ask their employer about concerns regarding health and safety. So again, it's all about reporting any concerns that they see about health and safety. The Ministry of Labor, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the Ministry of Labor. They keep changing their name. So right now, their name is Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development. So I've put both the acronyms there. Most of us will still refer to them as the MOL. So the MOL, they oversee and coordinate the Ontario's health and safety system. They lead a provincial strategy to prevent illnesses and injuries. And the Ministry of Labor, they can enter the workplace at any time. Sometimes they enter the workplaces because they happen to be in the neighborhood. Sometimes they'll be attending to a critical injury or a work refusal. And the Ministry of Labor, they also set inspection blitzes. So where they'll choose, like, for the quarter, we're gonna focus on a certain topic. And then they go and they target different workplaces. So this month they may say, oh, we're gonna target construction, and in the construction, we're gonna make sure, and they'll have whatever their strategy is. So we try to follow those strategies and try to make sure that, we are creating inspections and, making sure that our staff is aware of any blitzes that are happening. Again, just, to be proactive and just to stay on top of safety in the workplace as well. Ministry of Labor, they're also there to develop laws. So they're the ones who are creating the Occupational Health and Safety Act, et cetera. And they also work with WSAB, our Workplace Safety Insurance Board, the compensation board in Ontario. They set standards for health and safety training. They communicate and enforce the law, like I mentioned already, and I mentioned already that they have the power to enter workplaces, inspect and investigate, to identify contraventions. And Ministry of Labor is busy. Like in my 20 years, I've seen them a lot in lots of different capacities. They're real, they're out there, and they are entering the workplaces to make sure that, workplaces are being safe. This slide is just like an FYI. It's very interesting when it comes to legal liabilities and penalties of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. You can find that under section 66. I put this little asterisk over there. So in July 1st, the Ministry of Labor has actually increased the fines. The individual fine, I think, used to be, I think it was $100,000. And I think in like 2017, it was $25,000. So it's been going up like extreme, I would say. Now where an individual will be somebody like a supervisor, if found guilty, could be fined for a maximum of $500,000 per count, so per charge. So again, in my experience in the legal world, very rare will the Ministry of Labor go, through all the trouble and go to the legal branch and go to court for one charge. So typically, they'll be putting out like 3 charges or more, I would say. And again, that's the maximum penalty, but it's high. And also in July, this is something brand new. They never used to have a special section for directors and officers. Directors and officers would have been charged previously just under supervisors. And now a director or an officer of a corporation could be fined up to 1.5 million. So that's like big money. And again, all of these, like for supervisors, they were to be charged, it wouldn't be the employer who would be covering their costs for legal or costs of the charges. Because again, the employer would spend invest so much money to make sure that the supervisor is competent, et cetera. And then same corporation would be the same fine as a director or officer at 1.5 million. And in my experience, when I worked in the legal world, I would say, like, if you would to think who would be more vulnerable, would it be the employer or the supervisor? This is not too much of an interactive session just because of our time constraints, but I think typically prior to me working in the legal world, I would have always thought it would be the employer would be, the most at risk. You think they have the deeper pockets, and that's who the Ministry of Labor would go after. But it's not a matter of going after, it's about due diligence and what defense they would have. And the corporations usually tend to have a very good due diligence. They'll be able to show that, oh, we had the supervisor, and we had training, and we had a health and safety team, and we had our joint health and safety committee team, and we talk about health and safety every quarter or every meeting, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas a supervisor could tend to be more vulnerable because they're so busy with doing the day-to-day that sometimes they forget to make sure that they're doing their due diligence by documenting everything and just having enough evidence to prove that they took every reasonable precaution. And again, that's why I was telling you that why we do that 4-hour training with our supervisors, to make sure that they know what that is and teaching them about due diligence. I'm finding that I'm talking a lot and my time is flying, so I have to pick it up a notch. Okay, so the next slide is talking about the Workplace Safety Insurance Board, and I mentioned about them already that they're the ones, our compensation board for Ontario. So if somebody were to get hurt, an employee gets hurt at the workplace, WSIB is the one who would manage the claim, who would pay for the cost of the claim, cost for the healthcare, et cetera. Again, in the background, the employer is paying, probably 3 times the cost that WSIB is paying. And at the end of the year, like that's how WSIB, decides our premiums, et cetera, based on how well our insurance rates are doing. This is just a slide quickly just to show all the different ways that, health and safety is incorporated in the county. So we have health and safety within our leadership. We have, the supervisor, we have this SMT reviews policies. We have a program in place, corporate program. Then within each department, they have their procedures and training, et cetera. We have our joint health and safety committee who meets 10 times a year, and they do max investigations and workplace inspections on a monthly basis. We do hazard identification for our hazards in our areas. We make sure that everything we're doing for health and safety is documented, again, for our due diligence. And then we have a health and safety team. It's a very small team. I guess we're a smaller organization as well. It's myself as a supervisor. We have 1 advisor, and then I report to an HR/health and safety manager. So she has reduced like kind of half and half HR health and safety responsibilities. So together, this is how health and safety functions of the county. You won't be able to really read this. This is what I was mentioning earlier about how we have health and safety policies. I'm not sure what kind of access you guys have, if you guys have access to our Jostle, our intranet site, but if ever you wanted to see what these policies look like, and you haven't seen it already, you can reach out to Alicia and we can send you a copy of what our policies look like. It's actually just, I think it's this week they're going to be going for signing for this year. Joint health and safety committees, if you're not familiar with them, you most likely are. Workplaces that have 20 or more employees have to have a joint health and safety committee. They're made up of workers and managers. And basically, I would say their key responsibility is to make sure that they're identifying hazards and making recommendations. So if they feel like, there are things that are currently not working in the system, they could make recommendations to the senior leadership. And our committee is they're all really passionate, and I sit as an advisor on the committee. And we have 3 committees. Our county committee, we have a fire, the fire department has a committee, and our paramedic services have a committee as well. So hazards and reporting. Again, I'm not going to teach you about all the hazards, but these are the main key types of hazards in the workplace. And again, the main thing about hazards I mentioned before from a due diligence, et cetera, is making sure that, we're always identifying, assessing hazards, and we make sure that, everybody's reporting hazards as needed. And we have lots of ways that our employees can report hazards through their supervisors, senior leaders, our joint health and safety committee, the health and safety team. We have an anonymous link that employees can report hazards. And then worst case scenario, I would say if an employee really wanted to, they can make an anonymous call to the Ministry of Labor or just call the Ministry of Labor. We don't love that because again, it's like, a kid going and complaining about their parent to an outside body. And we typically we have a good relationship with our staff and we want them to be able to come to us if they have any concerns. These are all the different ways that we identify hazards. I'm not going to go through all. I think I've been talking about a lot of them, a lot of different ways that we identify hazards here at the county. This, I think during COVID, this picture, I think got very popular, but just basically the hierarchy of controls. And this is what we look at when we're trying to implement safety measures for health and safety, try to eliminate hazards where possible, and then substitute, engineer them out, create procedures, et cetera, and then put in personal protective equipment where needed. I won't go through each one of these, but again, in the regulation, there's very specific requirements of when a worker wants to refuse work. And usually if somebody was to refuse work, we would see if one of these are applicable. And then accordingly, again, the supervisor would investigate, and then we would bring in a joint health and safety committee and try to work it out internally. And if not, we would bring in the Ministry of Labor. This section, again, I won't go through every point, but basically it just shows that in the act, The employer and supervisor are not allowed to discipline basically or threaten their workers if they're, participating in health and safety, if they're reporting hazards, if they're reporting concerns, et cetera. If they're participating with the Ministry of Labor, there's pretty much anything to do with health and safety. An employee member could not be reprimanded for acting in their rights, et cetera. This slide just talks about if there's an injury in the workplace. Basically, if there's an injury in the workplace, obviously, they would have to report it to the supervisor. It gets investigated. If they seek medical attention, all that paperwork gets coordinated through the supervisor in health and safety. We report anytime a worker goes to the doctor or loses time from work, we report that to WSIB. And one of the basic things for us is if an employee gets hurt at work and they're not able to perform their regular duties because they have restrictions, we make sure that we're providing modified duties, which includes suitable, meaningful work to them. This is just showing you all the different health and safety systems within Ontario. Again, you may or may not have heard of some of these. We use some of these bodies for consulting and training services, but we would teach our staff about this just so that they know there's lots of resources out there when it comes to health and safety. WHMIS, somebody would say, like, why would you guys need to care about WHMIS? Sometimes you may come into the building and you may see a chemical. It's just for that basic reason. The employer pretty much has an obligation to give everybody health and safety awareness about WHMIS. And I think WHMIS, again, it probably dates back to part-time jobs, et cetera. Like, I remember I used to work at Pizza Hut 25 years ago. And, I would have done WHMIS training back then. But basically, I would say WHMIS, it has changed. It changed in 2015 to become the global classification system where some of the labels have, and not the labels, the symbols have changed a little bit. But the system is still the same. This slide just kind of teaches us just the difference. So, we can have an occupational injury, which is basically any injury, when we get a cut, strain. And then another type of injury we can have in the workplace with occupational illness, where, we can have hearing loss, we can get cancer from exposure to chemicals, et cetera. And then the last one here is latency period. It just talks about the time between initial exposure to a hazard and then when you start seeing symptoms. The main thing about WHMIS is that there's labels, the safety data sheets. It used to be called material safety data sheets. Now it's called safety data sheet to be in line with the global system and making sure that we're training our workers. Again, this slide just kind of talks about, again, all the different responsibilities for supplier, employer, and workers. And then under WHMIS, there's, some hazards are physical hazards and some are health hazards. And then these are the symbols. There's no way for me to teach you about all these symbols. But again, it's just to be familiar. When we see symbols, it's basically meaning symbols on chemicals. It's warning us about something, and that depending on the type of symbol, we have to be careful, how we store it, what chemicals we put beside each other, what type of personal protective equipment we're wearing. And it's always important anytime, I would say this in our home as well, is if we're handling chemicals, make sure we're reading the label so that we know that we're protecting ourselves properly. And especially if we have kids in the house. I have a 4-year-old at home, so I'm very careful where I keep chemicals, make sure that, I'm keeping them out of reach, and make sure I teach her too that if for some reason mommy leaves, a chemical accidentally on the counter, et cetera, how dangerous it is, don't touch, et cetera. These are just the 4 ways a chemical can enter our body, and it's important to know that, right? So obviously we can inhale a chemical, we can inject it into our bodies, we can, eat it, drink it, et cetera, and it can be absorbed into our skin. And the last topic we want to talk about, I have 1 minute, is this about workplace violence and harassment. And again, I think it was in 2010, it became so important to Ministry of Labor that they end up adding it to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. It never used to be in it, and now it's in the Act. And basically, in the Act, it makes, I'll go through the slide. It talks about making sure that the employer has a policy, which we have, making sure we're doing risk assessment of violence in the workplace, making sure we have a documented program, and make sure we have measures in place. I won't go through what the definitions are. I think, we can think about workplace violence as anytime, you exercise, threaten, or attempt to. So even if you pretend to punch somebody, that would be considered as, potentially workplace violence. And then usually when we look at a risk assessment, we look at like some of these key things, do you have direct contact with the public? Do you have any kind of enforcement duties? Are you working alone? Do you work in stressful situations, unstable environments? Provide service and handling cash. Those are kind of potential risk factors for workplace violence and harassment. And then again, harassment in the workplace, could be a comment or conduct against a worker that should have been known to be unwelcome. And then the sexual harassment, again, I don't have time to go through the definition, but remember, you're going to have this all in your handout as well. And then the discrimination too, it's against the law to discriminate employees or staff, co-workers in the workplace. Key responsibilities here for supervisors, it's pretty much the same as what we've been talking about before, that, we've got policies, procedures, program, make sure we're reporting, training, making sure that we investigate any concerns in the workplace. And again, this just goes through all the different ways we can introduce safety measures when it comes to workplace violence. And again, it's about training, making sure that we teach our staff de-escalation techniques, reporting incidents, etc. And then the next couple of slides just talk about, why that is important for us to be respectful and considerate of our staff. And again, to me, it seems silly. To me, you would think that this is kind of stuff that's, that's happening only in the schools and playgrounds, etc. But I've seen harassment and bullying, etc., in the workplace, and it's really important that, we're always mindful of how we behave and that we're behaving professionally with each other, clients, the public, etc. And yeah, this one just talks about that, we have to always act as role models and use respectful language, be inclusive, be considerate when we speak, practice humility, say hello. Saying hello seems silly, but yeah, sometimes, we walk by people and, well, don't say hello. And then this just talks about, having a respectful workplace, we improve morale, better teamwork, enhance relationships, greater job satisfaction, employee engagement, and improve well-being. And this just kind of shows the topics we talked about. I'm really sorry. I know it's like really fast. And I know when Alicia approached me to talk about this, I was like, I don't think I can do this in 30 minutes. Especially because I like to talk and I'm very passionate about this, but I'm not sure based on the topics that we covered today, again, just to give you a very general overview, and you will be getting a handout that's triple the length of this for you to get more information on each of these topics. Do you guys have any questions? There, now I can see everybody. No questions, comments, concerns?
I do see one from Bill Roshni.
Oh, sorry, Bill. Bill?
Yes, excuse me, just a quick question. When advisory committee have to worry about the Ontario Health Safety Act ever being used by the committee?
So again, right, to me, you guys are volunteers, right? And it is important for you to be aware. So that's why we brought up these topics. So obviously, like say workplace harassment, that's part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So you need to make sure that you guys are not harassing each other, right? So that's one way that it would incorporate you. When you're going to a meeting into the building, you need to look after your safety. So if you feel like, say we haven't cleared the sidewalks properly and it's icy, you don't want to get hurt. And if you see like a hazard, you can report that to, whoever your site contact is. So that's another example of how, and so I think it's important because you are a stakeholder in the organization. It's important to understand, like, all the different things that are happening in the background to make sure for your safety and for you to be able to participate in health and safety and know your rights too, right? So if ever you're, being asked to take a meeting in an area where maybe you feel it's unsafe, then, you have the right to say, I don't feel that's safe, and then to kind of start that conversation. Hopefully that answers your question, Bill.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Tom?
Yeah, what about, can you hear me?
Yep.
What about mental health?
Yeah, so mental health would be covered under, again, like a workplace injury or illness. So again, for us, we would be communicating to our staff and supervisors to always be looking at hazards. So if there's potential for something like, say, for example, paramedics, right? They're exposed to some sensitive stuff. So we would have to make sure that the measures in place, their supervisor have to make sure there are measures in place to mitigate any potential, like even like reactive stuff. So if they were exposed to scene, they have like committees to like talk about mental health from a proactive way. We have a mental health committee, just like we have the Joint Health and Safety Committee. We also have a mental health and wellbeing committee that meets, I think, about on a monthly basis, and they send out articles, etc. So again, I'm not sure if you guys have access to our Jocelyn articles, but we do. That's what we do for our staff is we do a lot of proactive sharing, and then we also have like our employee assistance program. So there's like a counseling, free counseling service if employees wanted to reach out and get support for mental health, whether it be work related or non-work related.
Thank you.
So this week actually is Bell Talk week. So we're going to be doing some sessions on that for staff and supervisors, I think on Wednesday for Bell Talk Day. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for your patience and for listening to me talk really fast through my 30-minute presentation. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Alicia to get my contact information. You guys can reach out to me anytime.
Okay, everybody. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to come. Like Roshni had said, she does have a handout which will be forwarded to all of you, along with it'll go to all of your committee members who maybe didn't make it, fellow committee members who didn't make it today. And we will be ensuring that you've signed off on the training just to make sure that you have read it, you understand it, and that Roshni is receives all the sign-offs so that she knows that you guys have completed. That's all that we have for today. So thank you for your time. And yeah, you will probably be in this room the next time that we see you guys. So thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.